I'm Anne Franke, the CEO of the Chartered Management Institute, and welcome to our first Friday afternoon Better Managers Briefing. We know this is a really tough time for everybody, and our workplace situation is changing incredibly rapidly. And what we want to do with this series of short broadcasts is just address the issues that we know that you are all facing, and we're facing them too, of course. And the format will be quite simple. You'll hear a few words from me on a particular topic, and then I'm going to be interviewing a guest on a tangential topic to get their perspective. And then, of course, we're throwing it open to all of you so that you can actually ask questions and make comments so that we keep on top of the things that you want to know and the things that you may be concerned about. So today's topic affects all of us now, or the vast majority of us, and that's about working from home. And for many of us, this is a new territory, and it brings with it completely new challenges. And so what we want to do in this particular show is focus on some of the best practices that will help you address those challenges. If you are joining us and want to ask a question, you have to hit the link below the YouTube broadcast. That will take you to the area where you can put in your question, and please feel free to do that as we go along. And then in the last half of today's show, we will address those questions. I'm going to be joined today by Daisy Hooper, who's our head of policy. And in the second part of the show, we're going to talk about some particular challenges that parents will face now that schools are closed and your children will be joining you in your workspace. But first, working from home. For many people, it's been a great ideal, but now it is a brand new reality, and it can be very challenging. So what are some of the best practices that CMI and others have discovered to make working from home as successful as it possibly can be in our current situation? Well, really, there are 4 things that are important for managers and leaders, not just for their teams, but also for they themselves to observe. And those 4 things are, first, be virtually visible. Now, this is easier said than done. And we'll come back and explore each one of these in turn. Secondly, manage mental health. This is in a very stressful time, not just for people concerned about their physical health, but people concerned about their financial welfare. Mental health is an issue and will be an issue for many of us. Thirdly, this is the time to practice agile management. We have to shift priorities quickly and embrace a constantly changing situation with updated information. And last, and perhaps most important of all, it's time to manage with a human face. That will be vital for all of us to overcome these difficulties. So first, being virtually visible. How do you do that? Well, one way is make sure that you just don't use email, because people that you work with will need to see you and hear your voice. So wherever you can, use tools such as FaceTime or Google Hangouts or other remote working tools, Zoom, that let you be visible. That is incredibly important. And also pick up the phone and talk to your folks. And what you will need to do in this time is over-communicate. So we advise that once every morning and once every afternoon, you check in with team members. If you have a very large team, you can do that together. If you have a smaller team, do it individually, and make sure that if you are doing a group check-in, that you make time to talk with individual members of your team to just find out how they are doing. Many teams are simply not used to being in a virtual environment, and they will find it quite isolating, and they can be a little bit lost. And keeping the human connection and keeping contact and over communicating with them is very, very important during this time. And if you're working with cross-functional teams, the same things apply. Make sure that you're checking with those people, and also create some fun, less formal opportunities. So at CMI, one of our colleagues suggested a Friday afternoon cocktail hour, which we think is a great idea. It can be with or without a real cocktail, or it can be a cup of tea, but it's just creating time in a digital environment for people just to blow off steam, share the successes of their week, maybe share things that they're looking forward to or that they may want solutions for. If you are not used to using technology, it will be really important, and managers must create opportunities for this, that your tech team is on standby to give you the help you need to make sure you have the access that you need. Now, I said managing mental health is incredibly important at this time. We have to respect that people will be anxious. They will be anxious about whether or not they are going to be ill. Perhaps someone in their family has symptoms. Perhaps they have elderly parents. They will also be anxious for their financial situation. We know that the economic impact of this is as big as the health impact for so many of us. So being aware of people's mental health and checking in, how are you feeling, and acknowledging that it's an anxious time will be very important. It's also important that you advise people not just to major in on the doom and gloom. It's very easy for us to over-index on seeking out information from all sorts of sources that just is going to make us worry. Advise your teams to limit that and make sure it's from respected sources. Do not indulge in a lot of things that are making the rounds on social media that simply aren't correct. So use respected government sources, Public Health England, sources that you can trust. That's vital. The third point is, your priorities are going to change daily. Maybe what was the situation yesterday is no longer the situation today. And you need to be aware of that. And you also need to refocus on projects. You can't do face-to-face projects anymore, but it does give you an opportunity to focus on those projects that you can do. So for example, it might be upgrading your team's digital collaboration tools or learning how to deliver events digitally and make really engaging content. Or it might be to upgrade your own digital skills. So there will be things that lend themselves to being done. It could be more focused project work where you need thinking time, but make sure that you are setting the right priorities and be aware that these priorities will need to change and probably change frequently. So you must also check in with your manager and leader to find out if what you're doing is still the thing that you should be focusing on. And the last thing is perhaps the most important, which is through all of this, it's so important that we maintain our human face, that we be kind, that we encourage others to be kind. Perhaps you want to encourage your teams to volunteer or help out an elderly neighbor or be there for each other. And in fact, one of the things we're going to explore next is something that I know is impacting huge numbers of you, which is simply that you will have kids at home and they will be part of your work environment. The professional and private worlds have collided, and there is very little distinction between the two. And that means that we all will need help, whether we have kids at home with us or whether we're colleagues whose colleagues have kids, in dealing with that situation. So to help us, let's bring in Daisy Hooper, who is the head of CMI's policy and a proud parent. Welcome, Daisy.
Thanks, Anne.
So just to start, why don't you tell us about your kids, how old they are, and tell us a little bit about what you do for CMI.
Sure. So I have two young kids. One is 5, one is 3. The older one is in school. The younger one is in nursery. But as of next week, like many parents, they will be home with me. As Anne mentioned, I'm head of policy and public affairs at CMI. As part of my role, I do a lot of research and writing. I usually do a lot of stakeholder engagement, often face-to-face. I manage a team, so it's quite a different situation now doing it all remotely.
So what are some of the challenges you think you're going to face starting next Monday, and what are you doing to cope with some of those challenges?
So I think the main challenge for me, aside from childcare generally, is going to be balancing the need to be both reactive and proactive in my role. My role is by definition like that. We respond to policy announcements, but we also have longer term plans. And being reactive often means being available at quite short notice. But with the kids around, my partner and I are having to put in place different plans, and I won't always be available at such short notice to deal with issues as they crop up.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things you're going to be doing to help you cope with this very new situation of not only working totally remotely, but with kids at home?
So I, like many other parents that I've spoken to, actually felt quite anxious about having the kids around. We are currently running a poll on Twitter asking how people are how parents are feeling about having their kids around and doing work at the same time. And it's pretty 50-50 actually. So if you feel strongly, go check it out and vote. To help me, I have designed a structure to my week, which has defined times for specific activities. I may not stick to it. I suspect it's more for me than for my kids, but I found it helpful in order to plan my week with them so I don't get cabin fever, and also so that I can plan when I can and can't be available for work, and to let my colleagues know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think also the main thing is to just not be too harsh on yourselves, as you talked about, Anne, the need for agile management. I think the same is true of looking after the kids in this situation. I saw something on social media where someone said, if you just keep them alive for the next few months, you're doing well. So take each day as it comes. Don't worry if things go awry too much, and hope that your colleagues will be sensitive to that fact.
Well, and some of the things I know that I've seen your schedule, it's very impressive, but in there are things like scheduling playtime, learning time. A lot of the schools are sending homework, but also time to go outside, right? They're kids, they, whether that's obviously they have to be safe, and maybe it's a garden or a nearby park where they can still keep away from others as they've been asked to do, but get some outdoor time. So I have seen your schedule. I think it's very impressive. And the other thing that you've said as well is asking, for empathy and humanity of your colleagues. And, there can be some humor, right? There can be some of those magic moments when you're in the middle of something and, your kid creeps up and says something funny. And hopefully there will be some of those uplifting moments as well. And are there things that you think that might be advantages to the current situation? You mentioned the Twitter poll and the 50-50. What are some of the upsides that you see?
So I'm quite used to working flexibly. I tend to work from home around once a week anyway. Luckily, CMI are very supportive of that. But even for me, working from home every day is strange and different. One of the things I've noticed is that I'm sleeping a bit better because I'm not so worried about doing the rush in the morning to get the kids to school before I have to go to work. So that's definitely an upside. I'm getting to spend more time with them. So yeah, I think there are kind of
Mm-hmm.
nice things coming out of it as well.
So I think for everybody, no commute is a real upside. And, I've heard that another colleague mentioned, gee, it's so great. I get to have breakfast now every day with the kids. And often as working parents, these are things that we don't get to do. And now we do get to do them. And what I was saying before about mental health, it's really important to look for some positives as well. So maybe, doing that puzzle together, or doing the learning together, there could be some very good moments in there. As well as the moments where you might be on a conference call and suddenly you have a crying child. And oops, you have to mute yourself and you might have to excuse yourself from that conference call. So what would you want to ask of your colleagues, maybe especially those who don't have kids at this trying time?
Yeah, so I think definitely some understanding that things might not always run to schedule or as planned. Also, a request to try not to put things in my diary if you can avoid it at very short notice, and just check my diary for my availability. I'm keeping it updated as best I can with when I will and won't be available immediately. And just some sensitivity, I guess, to the fact that this is a new frontier for many of us, and there may be take some time for it to bed in.
I think those are all great suggestions. And some of those suggestions apply to just the best practices of working anyway. So for example, having a schedule, it's very, easy. Somebody said to me, oh gosh, there's no schedule. I'm on my laptop from the moment I wake up till the moment I go to bed. That is how not to work at home. You do need a schedule. You do need to plan in time, family time as well, and non-work time. So, when the end of the day comes around, shut the laptop, walk away, and make sure that you do have that kind of schedule, and keep your calendar up to date. We share our calendars. I think shared calendars are very important in this situation. So you can see maybe when your colleague has time where they've got to, for example, spend the time setting up their kids for the day, and don't schedule conference calls during that time. So those are all great tips, Daisy. Is there anything else you'd like to share for the parents that are looking forward to next Monday with very mixed views?
Well, I'm happy to share my schedule if anyone thinks that would be helpful. It's just cobbled together from other resources, but very happy to share. And I guess just one request to employers, CMI are really genuinely very good at this, but as parents, it's not always our choice to have our kids with us while working at the same time. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but at the same time, for parents, it's a very specific challenge. And I think it's nice if companies can enable all of their staff to work flexibly and enable them to take chunks out of their working day if they want to, for example, volunteer, or they just need to go to the shops, so that it doesn't become a parents against non-parents thing.
I think that's a great suggestion, and also really important. We all need to work flexibly over the coming weeks and months. We will all have different needs. Some of us there'll be parenting needs. For others, it might be community needs, or going to the shops. And I think it's a really important point you're making. And that's also part of being, and showing the human side of good management and leadership. So thank you, Daisy. We're now going to move to begin to take some questions. And we have some questions on the way. So this is from Victoria. How do you approach having a conversation with people who would not be eligible to work from home and need to stay in the office? That's a really good question. Now, obviously, there are many critical workers, whether they're care workers, the NHS workers, the supermarket workers, and others that can't work from home. And, I would be honest about that conversation. Obviously, you're in a critical role and you're still needing to go into the office. I understand that. We will still make time available. If you're managing those people, it's really important that you make time available for them in the same way you would a colleague that is working remotely. I think it's very important as well that you acknowledge that some of the roles they may be doing may make them anxious because they're still dealing with a lot of members of the public. And again, I think they're not perhaps self-isolating like the rest of us, and therefore might have even more pronounced concerns about their health and well-being. And I think you really do need to be very sensitive to that. Apart from that, I would just be mindful to acknowledge the vital role that they are playing and make sure that you thank them for that. And by the way, thanking people and praising people is still very important and will be very important over the coming weeks and months. This is from Gareth. Oh, Gareth is watching from Brisbane, Australia. Well, welcome, Gareth. This is obviously a global issue for everybody. Gareth says or asks, with the current environment we are facing, how do you believe leadership training will change to accommodate remote staff and promote positive performance management and career growth? Well, the obvious thing, Gareth, is the face-to-face learning environments are almost not happening. If they are happening, they're happening in, few and far between. So we're all going digital. And one of the things that we can really do is up our capability in that area. And I think we can make use of this time well. We deal with a lot of universities. I was speaking yesterday with one of those, one person that works at a university, a very well-respected one, that isn't used to delivering face-to-face content. And he was very candid, saying a lot of people are very nervous about, they suddenly have to deliver what is supposed to be super engaging content in a digital environment where they've never done that before. So my advice there would be, let's share some best practice on how you do that. And in fact, we agreed that we will make a subject of a future webinar. How do we deliver more engaging content digitally? This could be true if you're a trainer or a lecturer and you're regularly delivering things in the old world face-to-face, and suddenly you find you need to do them digitally. So watch this space. We're going to devote a whole nother session to exactly Gareth's question. So this is from Jay. I think team members struggling with infertility will find it hard to accommodate the difficulties working parents will have due to resentment. Apart from being understanding and encouraging others to be kind, do you have any advice for managing this? Well, obviously, this is a very specific situation. And, I think, again, being respectful of everybody's individual circumstance is important. I do think that, and I would also say that if there are things like this that are creating resentment because suddenly people are seeing children and they would like to have children themselves, I think for the person suffering the infertility, is there somebody you can talk with to share your anxiety or your feelings with? So many employers offer employee assistance programs, for example, where you can actually have very private conversations, confidential conversations about how to cope with things that might be difficult for you. And I think that's what I would advise in that particular scenario, is that if things are causing you stress, that you seek out coping mechanisms. If there isn't a colleague you can speak with, there will be an employee assistance program, perhaps, or other mental health resources where you can reach out and get specific advice. So children, I am interested in how businesses are planning to respond to varying degrees of productivity that will undoubtedly be a consequence of having to provide childcare. I think managers and leaders have a responsibility to reassure their working parents that they understand the family does not follow a work schedule and that health is more important. What is the CMI guidance for managing performance in this time? Well, actually, I'm going to bring Daisy back to this because Daisy talked about her views and what she was asking for employers and some of the things that she was going to do to deal with this. So, and that's very much reflecting our CMI guidance. So Daisy, what would you advise?
So, personally, I find having that structure really helpful, and having those regular check-ins. And I certainly don't want to, I still want to be pushed by my manager and challenged to do good and interesting work. And I think that's really important for the manager to do. But it's just that the context is a bit different. So there needs to be that understanding that, expecting things to be done by a certain time if you're only given very short notice might not be possible in this situation. Making allowances if people need to take time off at short notice. Just those kind of small things. So there's still the structure, there's still the development opportunities there's still the regular contact and support, but also a lot of flexibility, I guess, in this time when everybody is feeling a little bit strange.
And I would add, I think Daisy's absolutely right. And she said she's sharing her schedule with her colleagues so they can see that. And the other thing we advise, and it's very important, is focus on outcomes. Focus on outcomes. It really doesn't matter when somebody does something. What matters is that they do it and do it well. So, if a working parent with kids now at home needs to do work after the kids are in bed, or, work around their children's schedule, as a manager and leader, you shouldn't mind as long as the output of that work is of a good quality. That's really what matters, isn't it? It's the outcomes, not the hours. And really, the quality of the output, not the when it's done. Now, of course, there will be critical meetings, and there we just have to grin and bear it if it's difficult with kids around. But again, this is where the human side becomes just so very important. So this is from Tom, not so much a question, and it's a piece of advice. We've lost a number of frontline staff due to them falling within high-risk categories regarding susceptibility to the virus. Those who haven't already will need to start planning for this now. Completely agree, Tom. There are high-risk, vulnerable categories. Those are older people, people with underlying conditions, pregnant women. There are those high-risk categories. And what we're doing at CMI, and we advise others to do, is we have a reporting mechanism for everybody to flag up who in their teams is vulnerable. Those people actually have already been working from home at CMI for some time. But we update this regularly. We have weekly updates, and it's the responsibility of the manager to update, what is their team's capacity? Because clearly, if you lose a lot of your team to this illness, or because they're vulnerable or because they're ill, you need to know that. You need to report that. Your manager also needs to know that, and your company needs to know that. So this is from Tracy. Will these webinars be a regular thing? And will we be able to open up to people outside the CMI? So yes and yes, Tracy. We're going to do them every Friday, the Better Managers Briefing at 1 o'clock. The topics will vary, and you're welcome to suggest topics. So, for example, my university colleagues wanted a topic on how to make much more engaging digital content to deliver as a in the way you would a lecture or a face-to-face training. How do you do that digitally? And we will be sharing this on our social channels, so on CMI's LinkedIn, on CMI's Twitter, and those are open to everybody. On our Facebook page, those are open to everybody, and we'll be sharing the content out as well with our partner network so they can share it more widely as well. So absolutely, yes. And then the last question from Neil, is there any chance there will be some resources on the CMI platform to reinforce the big four you mentioned at the beginning of the webinar? It would be really useful to share. Yes, and in fact, we already have shared some of these tips in a tweet. I know that tweet's been viewed already tens of thousands of times. We're going to be making this webinar available on our social channels, and we're going to continue to make not only our own content, but others' content as well, especially around those big four, the being virtually visible, managing mental health, being agile and swift to change your prioritization as needed, and showing the human face of management. So watch this space. You'll have a lot more from all of us in the coming weeks on all of these topics. So that's it from me and from Daisy. I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank Daisy for sharing her perspectives as a parent. Thank you all, and we will be sharing this out shortly. And tune in next week for our Better Managers Briefing show, Friday at 1 o'clock. And stay safe and stay strong. Thanks so much for joining us.